The sun had fallen into a copper-red haze over the wasteland when the boy, though he had long since shed the softness of youth, stumbled through the ribs of a long-dead saguaro and collapsed to his knees, tasting dust and rust on his tongue as if the desert itself meant to swallow him whole. And perhaps it would have if fate had not already carved a different path for him, one older than names, one older than nations, one whispered by spirits who slept beneath the bones of forgotten mountains. He had been 3 days without water, 7 without purpose, and a lifetime without belonging, wandering from ruin to ruin in a land carved by drought and violence, where old war machines lay, half buried like the fossils of mechanical beasts, and the air shimmered with heat that could peel a man's mind apart. And though he tried to rise again, his legs refused him, trembling as if every step he had taken since birth now demanded repayment. He pressed his forehead into the cooling dust and let out a breath that sounded like surrender. Yet before his eyes dimmed fully, he felt the shadow pass over him. Not the shadow of a hawk circling overhead hoping for an easy feast, nor the shadow of a dune cresting above him like a wave, but the shadow of a figure standing tall, steady, unmoving, radiating a presence that felt like the first true thing he had encountered in years. And when he forced his eyelids open, he saw her, a woman draped in layered hides and woven cloth dyed with crimson clay, her braids threaded with silver, bone, and desert glass that reflected the sinking sun in shards of living fire, her eyes dark as the obsidian cliffs. And though time had carved the lines of many seasons into her face, she carried them with the authority of a mountain carved by Winda, matriarch not by accident but by design, her posture poised like a spear planted into the earth. She studied him for a long moment, neither cruel nor pitying, simply assessing him the way one might assess whether a dying ember could be coaxed back into flame. And then she knelt, her steps silent, her presence vast, and placed a water gourd to his cracked lips, not forcing, simply offering. Yet even that gentle motion carried an expectation, as if she already sensed something in him worth salvaging. When he drank, the water burned down his throat like new life, and when he coughed she steadied him with a hand on his shoulder, calloused yet steady, the touch of someone who had held together tribes, families, and perhaps the world itself in an age when everything else had cracked apart. "You should not be alive," she said in a voice shaped by storms and ceremony, not unkind but certainly not soft, a voice that felt like it carried the memories of ancestors who walked with wolves and painted their stories on canyon walls. And though he tried to answer, his voice came out as little more than a rasping croak. But she shook her head as if she had not expected words from him yet. She helped him sit upright, studying the scars on his arms, the burn pattern across his ribs from an explosion he had barely survived weeks earlier, the emptiness in his gaze that spoke of betrayals and battles and losses he could not name. "The desert does not spare the hopeless," she murmured, as though speaking to herself. "So if you still breathe, there is meaning in it." And as he blinked at her, confused not by her words, but by the weight behind them, she reached into a pouch at her side and took out a pinch of red earth, pressing it into his palm. "You stand on the threshold of death," she said, "but death did not claim you. Perhaps because your purpose is not finished. Perhaps because mine is not either." And her eyes narrowed just slightly, not in suspicion but in recognition, as if the dust itself had whispered something to her. With surprising strength she lifted him to his feet, slinging his arm over her shoulder, guiding him toward a formation of weathered stones that appeared at first like a mirage, but soon revealed themselves to be ancient markers, the entrance to a hidden encampment, tucked into the folds of a sandstone canyon where the air cooled and the wind threaded through narrow passages like a soft flute song carried by unseen spirits. As they entered, other figures emerged, warriors, hunters, children, each bearing the same earth-red markings on their skin, each stopping in their tracks as they saw him, their gazes sliding immediately to the matriarch as though awaiting her judgment. She raised one hand, not to silence them but to declare her authority, and the crowd obeyed instantly. She brought him into a shelter carved directly into the canyon wall, lit by oil lamps and lined with woven tapestries depicting the rise and fall of clans across centuries, symbols of lineage looping through time like constellations, reimagined in red and black thread. Only then did she speak with full intention. standing before him not merely as the woman who had rescued him, but as the sovereign of an unbroken legacy. "My name is Naeli, matriarch of the Red Earth Apache," she said, each word landing with ceremonial gravity. "And I found you not by coincidence, but by calling. The Wasteland spoke of you in the dreams of my elders, a wanderer whose blood carries both ruin and renewal, one who stands outside all tribes, yet is fated to build one anew. And though he opened his mouth to protest, he was nothing, no one. A drifter shaped by violence and bad luck." Her expression stopped him. "You think yourself broken," she said, reading the doubt in his eyes as though it were written on his skin. "But broken things can be reforged, and the spirits favor those who have survived fire." And she stepped closer, placing two fingers just above his heart, where a faint, unnatural humming pulse had lived inside him since the explosion that killed his companions and should have killed him. "Your heartbeat does not belong solely to you," Naeli whispered, her voice dropping into something reverent. "It carries the echo of the old world and the hunger of the new. That is why the desert let you live. That is why I brought you here." And as confusion churned inside him, she straightened, her posture tall and unshakable, her silhouette cast against the stone walls like a warrior goddess carved from the earth itself. "My people stand at the edge of extinction," she said, "our bloodline thinned by war, poisoned water, and the machines that scarred our homeland. But the elders say a new father of renewal will rise from the wasteland, a man who has walked with loss, who has swallowed death and lived, a man who can seed a lineage strong enough to outlive the ruins of tomorrow." And her gaze locked onto his, not demanding, not pleading, but evaluating, as if choosing whether to reveal the truth or let him die without it. "I believe you are that man," she said finally, and the air inside the shelter seemed to still, as though even the dust held its breath. "I offer you water, shelter, and purpose," Naeli continued, her voice now carrying the rhythm of ritual. "But more than that, I offer you a place in a legacy older than empires, a chance to become the father of a reborn bloodline, not through force, not through possession, but through destiny forged in your own choosing." And though his throat tightened with disbelief and fear, something deeper stirred within him, something he had buried beneath years of wandering, something that might have been hope or might have been dread. She extended her hand to him, palm outward, an invitation that carried the weight of prophecy and the warmth of possibility. "Rise if you accept the path before you," she said quietly. "Rise, wanderer, and begin the life you were meant to claim." And the entire canyon seemed to pulse with expectation as he stared at her hand, shaking, exhausted, scared, yet drawn to the certainty she radiated, a certainty he had never possessed for himself. Slowly, painfully, he lifted his hand to hers, and the moment their palms touched, the air cracked with a sound like distant thunder, and the lamps flickered as if stirred by invisible wings, and the watchers outside murmured prayers beneath their breath, for they understood that the desert's prophecy had just awakened. He felt a warmth bloom in his chest, not physical but spiritual, as if something ancient had been waiting inside him for this moment. And Naeli nodded once, solemn and fierce, already turning toward the entrance where the tribe waited, already preparing to announce what the spirits had long foretold. The wanderer had been chosen, the bloodline would rise again, and the wasteland's long silence had finally begun to break. Yet even as she led him out into the gathering dusk, he could not help glancing back into the shadows of the shelter, sensing that the story he had just stepped into was far larger than the woman who found him, or the tribe she led, or even the wasteland that had nearly claimed him. It was a story written in red earth and old bones, a story of renewal rising from ruin, a story that would test the limits of his strength, spirit, and identity. And though fear coiled in his gut, something like purpose began to unfurl beside it, whispering that perhaps this was why he had survived every trial that should have killed him. Perhaps this was what he had been wandering toward all along. And as the tribe gathered, as the stars began to appear one by one like the eyes of ancestors watching from the sky, and as Naeli placed a hand on his shoulder before addressing her people, he felt a tremor of destiny pulse through him, telling him this was only the beginning. If you want to hear the rest of this journey, if you wanted to witness how a broken wanderer becomes the father of a new age, make sure to subscribe. Stay with us and prepare for Chapter 2, because the desert has only begun to reveal its secrets.